Hundreds of abandoned villages are scattered across Russia, but some of them hide secrets that dwarf even the most terrifying stories. Places where time stopped with the last breath of their inhabitants. Villages that locals avoid, whispering ancient curses. Today, we will embark on a journey through the most sinister corners of our country, where the past refuses to be buried, and the dead give no peace to the living. Welcome to the world of cursed ghost villages. If this story has made you think about the secrets our land holds, subscribe to the channel and like the video. What do you think about the nature of cursed places? Are they real anomalies or the product of collective imagination? Share your opinion in the comments. There are thousands of abandoned villages and settlements scattered throughout Russia, but only a few of them have a particularly sinister reputation. Local residents call them cursed, while tourists and paranormal researchers are eager to visit these places, unaware of the dangers that may await them there. The phenomenon of cursed ghost villages is a unique combination of historical tragedies, collective memory, and unexplained phenomena. Unlike ordinary abandoned settlements, these places are surrounded by an atmosphere of fear and mysticism that has been passed down from generation to generation. According to ethnographic research, there are more than 300 settlements in Russia that local residents consider cursed. The history of most of these places goes back to the distant past. Tragic events, plague epidemics, mass murders, natural disasters, or military actions have left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the people. Over time, real historical facts have become overgrown with legends, myths, and superstitions, creating an aura of mystery and danger around these places. The peculiarity of cursed villages is that even after the disappearance of the last inhabitants, these places continue to influence the surrounding area. Hunters and mushroom pickers tell of strange sounds, ghostly figures, and an inexplicable feeling of fear that arises when approaching the ruins of old houses. Animals avoid such places, and the vegetation often looks unhealthy and stunted. Modern science attempts to explain these phenomena from the perspectives of psychology, geophysics, and ecology. Researchers have put forward hypotheses about the influence of geomagnetic anomalies, soil contamination with toxic substances, or collective psychosis. However, many facts remain unexplained, which only reinforces the mystical reputation of these places. The Church also pays attention to the phenomenon of cursed villages. Clergymen talk about places where grave sins were committed and where the earth is literally saturated with human suffering. In their opinion, such places require special consecration and prayers for the repose of the souls of the dead. But what if some tragedies were so large-scale that they left an indelible mark on reality itself? Interest in cursed villages continues to this day. Stalkers, paranormal enthusiasts, and researchers of anomalous zones regularly organize expeditions to such places. Their stories often contradict each other, but they agree on one thing: these places are truly special. Perhaps the answer lies in the very nature of human consciousness and its ability to influence the surrounding world. The study of cursed villages reveals an amazing picture of the interconnection between history, psychology, and mysticism. Each such place is a book written by human suffering and time. And perhaps understanding the nature of these phenomena will help us better understand ourselves. But are we ready for the secrets that may be revealed in the process of such research? To understand the nature of cursed villages, we must turn to the ancient roots of Russian culture and beliefs. Long before the adoption of Christianity, our ancestors had a developed system of beliefs about the connection between man, the earth, and the other world. These archaic beliefs did not disappear with the arrival of the new religion, but were transformed, creating a unique synthesis of pagan and Christian traditions. In Slavic mythology, the earth was considered a living being, capable of remembering and responding to human actions. The concept of a cursed place existed even in the pre-Christian era. The ancient Slavs believed that the land on which evil was committed became unclean and could harm the people living on it. Places of mass burials, sacrifices, or other ritual activities were considered especially dangerous. Pagan priests, known as Volkovs, possessed the knowledge of how to cleanse defiled land, or, conversely, how to place a curse on it. According to ancient legends, a curse could be placed not only on a specific person, but also on an entire settlement. Special rituals were used for this purpose, including spells, symbolic actions, and sacrifices. The Christianization of Rus did not eradicate these beliefs, but gave them new forms. The concepts of sin and divine punishment were superimposed on ancient ideas about cursed places. The Church recognized the existence of places marked by God's wrath, but explained this not as the work of pagan forces, but as punishment for sins. This is how the Christian interpretation of the phenomenon of cursed villages arose. Folk legends about so-called sinful villages played a special role in shaping ideas about cursed places. These were settlements whose inhabitants, in the opinion of those around them, led an unrighteous lifestyle. They engaged in robbery, did not observe religious precepts, or practiced forbidden rites. It was believed that such villages would sooner or later be punished by higher powers. The Mongol invasion of the 13th century was a turning point in the history of cursed places in Russia. Mass destruction, murder, and looting left a deep mark on the people's memory. Many settlements that were particularly severely ravaged gained a permanent reputation as cursed. Local residents believed that the souls of those killed could not find peace and continued to wander the earth. The plague epidemics that periodically ravaged Russian lands also contributed to the formation of ideas about cursed villages. Settlements that had been completely wiped out by disease became objects of fear and superstition. People believed that the plague could be sent as punishment for sins or as a result of witchcraft. The turbulent times of the early 17th century brought a new wave of tragedies. Civil wars, famine, and robberies created many new, cursed places. Villages whose inhabitants were tortured by Polish invaders or Cossack troops gained a particularly sinister reputation. Folk memory preserved stories of how the souls of the dead martyrs appeared to the living, demanding justice and revenge. Interestingly, ideas about cursed places were not static. They evolved under the influence of historical events and social changes. But the belief that the earth remembers everything that happened on it and is capable of influencing people's destinies remained unchanged. This ancient wisdom may contain a grain of truth that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. But how exactly could ancient curses retain their power for centuries? And is there a scientific explanation for this phenomenon? 40 kilometers from the city of Uglitch, in the dense forests of the Yaroslavl region, lie the ruins of a village with the gloomy name of Varfolomivka. This settlement disappeared from maps at the end of the 17th century, but its sinister fame has survived to this day. Local residents still avoid these places, and the rare daredevils who decide to visit the ruins tell of strange phenomena and an inexplicable feeling of anxiety. The history of Varfolomivka began in the mid-16th century, when Boyar Varfolomei Nagoy received these lands as a gift from Ivan the Terrible. The settlement quickly grew and became one of the richest in the area. The inhabitants were engaged in agriculture, beekeeping, and trade with passing merchant caravans. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed the tragedy that would befall the village several decades later. Everything changed in 1690 when a new manager arrived in Varfolomivka, Stepan Krovavi, who got his nickname for his cruelty in suppressing peasant revolts. This man turned the lives of the local residents into a living hell. Exorbitant taxes, cruel punishments for the slightest offenses, and the arbitrariness of the clerks drove the peasants to despair. According to surviving documents, on the night of St. Bartholomew's Day, in 1691, a tragedy occurred that forever changed the fate of the village. Driven to extremes, the peasants rebelled against their oppressors. The uprising was brutally suppressed, and its participants were executed in the most sophisticated ways. According to some sources, more than 300 people died, practically the entire adult population of the village. But the tragedy did not end there. A few months after the massacre in Bartholomew's Day, strange events began to occur. Surviving residents told of the voices of the dead echoing at night, ghostly figures wandering the streets, and the curses uttered by the executed before their deaths. One after another, misfortunes began to occur. Livestock deaths, crop failures, mysterious illnesses. The well in the center of the village, where, according to rumors, the bodies of executed rebels were thrown, gained a particularly sinister reputation. The water in it turned red as blood and acquired a disgusting smell. Those who dared to drink from this well fell ill with a strange disease accompanied by visions and clouding of the mind. The local priest tried to consecrate the well, but the water never cleared. By the beginning of the 18th century, Varfolomivka was completely deserted. The last residents left the cursed place, taking only the bare necessities with them. The wooden houses gradually fell into ruin, and the forest began to reclaim the territory. But the memory of the tragic events was preserved in folk legends, passed down from generation to generation. Modern researchers of paranormal phenomena have repeatedly attempted to study the ruins of Varfolomivka. Their stories are strikingly similar. All note the unusual silence that reigns in this place, the complete absence of birds and insects, as well as strange sounds resembling moans or cries. Some researchers claim to have seen ghostly figures in old clothes wandering among the ruins. Of particular interest is the fact that within a kilometer radius of the former village, certain types of plants still do not grow, and animals avoid these places. Soil analyses have not revealed any anomalies, but local hunters claim that game avoids this area. Perhaps the collective memory of the tragedy somehow affects the environment? But the most mysterious question remains: why does a tragedy that happened 300 years ago continue to influence the present? And can a curse really be passed down through generations? In the 21st century, interest in cursed villages is not waning, but rather growing every year. Modern eyewitnesses, from casual travelers to professional paranormal investigators, continue to report strange occurrences in abandoned settlements. Their testimonies, recorded and documented, paint a remarkable picture of a phenomenon that science cannot yet explain. Mikhail Voronkov, a local historian from Kostroma, has spent more than 20 years studying the cursed villages of central Russia. His archive contains hundreds of eyewitness accounts dating back 30 years. The most striking thing, says the researcher, is the repetitiveness of certain phenomena. People who have never heard of each other describe almost identical events in the same places. One of the most documented cases is the story of a group of tourists in the abandoned village of Chernaya Sloboda in the Vologda region. On August 5, 2018, 4 friends set up camp near the ruins of an old church. At night, they were awakened by sounds resembling the ringing of bells, even though the bell tower had been destroyed in the 1930s. The sounds seemed to come from underground, recalls one of the expedition members, Alexei Semyonov. We turned on our flashlights, but saw nothing. Instead, we heard footsteps and women's voices singing church hymns in Old Slavonic. The most frightening thing was that the singing stopped as soon as we tried to record it on a tape recorder. No less mysterious was the incident that happened to photographer Elena Morozova in the village of Mortvy Klayuchi in the Nizhny Novgorod region. Having arrived there to shoot a documentary film about abandoned settlements, she discovered that all the photographs she took contained additional figures, ghostly silhouettes of people in old-fashioned clothes. At the same time, there was no one else around during the shooting. "I am a professional photographer with 15 years of experience," Elena claims. "I know all the technical features of my equipment and can say with certainty that these images are not the result of double exposure or other photographic effects. The photos show people who simply weren't there." Particularly intriguing are reports of so-called time anomalies in cursed villages. Paranormal researcher Igor Vasilyev recounts an incident that happened to him in the abandoned village of Pogost in the Tver region. "Entering a ruined house, I suddenly heard sounds characteristic of a living space: the creaking of floorboards, the clattering of dishes, a child crying. For a moment, I thought I saw the interior of a traditional Russian house: a table, benches, icons in the red corner. The vision lasted only a few seconds, but it was so real that I instinctively stepped back." Psychologist Marina Stepanova, who studies the influence of cursed places on the human psyche, notes an interesting pattern. People who visit such places often experience similar sensations: inexplicable anxiety, a feeling of being watched, a desire to leave the area as soon as possible. At the same time, many note that these feelings arise even before they learn about the history of the place. Modern technical means allow us to record anomalies that previously might have gone unnoticed. Researchers report unexplained fluctuations in the electromagnetic field, changes in temperature without apparent cause, and the appearance of voices on recordings that no one uttered. The phenomenon of electronic voice phenomena in cursed villages requires serious scientific study. Dmitry Kozlov, an electronics engineer specializing in the study of anomalous zones, says, "In such places, devices often record signals that do not correspond to known natural or technical sources. It seems that the space itself in these zones has some special properties. However, skeptics point out that many paranormal phenomena may have entirely earthly explanations. Infrasound from the wind in ruined buildings can cause a feeling of anxiety, and the play of light and shadow can create the illusion of movement. But how can we explain the identical testimonies of people who visited these places at different times and independently of each other? Perhaps the key to the mystery lies not only in the field of physics or psychology, but also in the depths of the human consciousness, which is somehow capable of perceiving imprints of the past? The village of Chernaya Griaz in the Tula region did not get its ominous name by accident. Founded in the early 16th century, this settlement survived one of the most terrible epidemics in the history of the Russian lands. The events that took place here in 1728 forever changed the fate of the village and left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the local residents. At that time, Chernaya Griaz was a thriving village with a population of over 500 people. The inhabitants were engaged in agriculture, cattle breeding, and blacksmithing. The village was located on the trade route between Tula and Moscow, which provided its inhabitants with additional income from servicing passing merchant caravans. No one could have imagined that it was precisely these trade ties that would cause the impending disaster. In the spring of 1728, a merchant caravan from the southern provinces arrived in the village. Along with their goods, the merchants brought a terrible disease, bubonic plague. The first cases of the disease were recorded at the end of May, but the local doctor mistook them for a common fever. This mistake proved costly for the villagers, as the disease began to spread at a catastrophic rate. By mid-June, there was not a single family in Chernaya Griaz that had not been affected by the epidemic. Dozens of people died every day. The bodies were placed in mass graves on the outskirts of the village, but soon there was not enough space in the cemetery. The surviving residents were forced to burn the bodies right on the streets, which contradicted Orthodox traditions and caused additional fears. The darkest events took place on the night of June 24th to 25th. According to the few survivors, it was then that what the locals call the Great Curse happened. The dying priest, Father Nicodim, who had lost his entire family to the disease, cursed the village and all those who had brought death to it in despair. His dying words, uttered in agony, were so terrible that witnesses refused to repeat them. By the end of the summer, less than 30 people remained alive out of the 500 inhabitants of Black Mud. The survivors left the cursed place, scattering to the surrounding villages. The village was deserted, but the story of its tragedy was just beginning. Already in the fall of that year, reports began to arrive about strange phenomena in the abandoned settlement. Travelers passing by the village told of eerie sounds coming from the empty houses, moans, cries, and prayers in an incomprehensible language. Some claim to have seen ghostly figures wandering the streets and the cemetery. Particularly often mentioned was the image of a priest in a black cassock who appeared at the ruined church at midnight. Attempts to repopulate the village were made repeatedly, but all ended in failure. New residents complained of nightmares, unexplained illnesses, and a feeling of constant fear. Cattle fell ill and died, crops failed to grow, and wells produced water with a foul odor. After a few months, people left the village, taking only the bare essentials with them. The old well in the center of the village, which the locals nicknamed Black Eye, gained a particularly sinister reputation. According to legend, it was into this well that the bodies of those who died of the plague were thrown when there was not enough space in the cemetery. The water in the well turned black and emitted a foul odor reminiscent of the smell of decay. The few brave souls who dared to look into it claimed to have seen human remains at the bottom. In the 19th century, attempts were made to scientifically study the phenomenon of black mud. In 1873, District Dr. Pavel Voronin conducted a detailed study of the area, but was unable to find a rational explanation for the phenomena occurring there. In his report, he wrote, "This place is truly cursed, for nature is disturbed here. Neither plants nor animals thrive here, and people experience an inexplicable aversion and fear." Modern researchers are also interested in black mud. Archaeological excavations conducted in 2010 confirmed mass burials from the period of the epidemic. Several mass graves containing the remains of hundreds of people were discovered. Interestingly, radiocarbon analysis showed that the skeletal remains corresponded exactly to the period of the epidemic of 1728. But the most mysterious find was a lead box discovered in the foundation of a ruined church. Inside were manuscripts in Church Slavonic, containing a detailed description of the events of the epidemic, and the text of a curse uttered by a dying priest. Researchers noted that the handwriting becomes increasingly illegible towards the end of the text, as if the writer was in a state of extreme agitation or illness. The question remains, could the dying priest's curse really have put a curse on the land? Or was the tragedy so great that it created a kind of energy imprint that still affects the place today? Modern science is not indifferent to the phenomenon of cursed villages. Over the past 30 years, numerous studies have been conducted to find rational explanations for these mysterious phenomena. Scientists from various fields of knowledge, geophysicists, psychologists, doctors, ecologists, are trying to unravel the mystery of places that have inspired inexplicable fear in people for centuries. Alexander Petrov, Doctor of Physical and Mathematical Sciences at Moscow University, heads a research group studying geophysical anomalies in so-called cursed zones. We have found that many of these places are characterized by unusual geomagnetic indicators, says the scientist. The Earth's magnetic field in such areas has atypical characteristics, which can affect the navigation abilities of animals and even the mental state of humans. Studies have shown that magnetic declination anomalies are often observed within a radius of several kilometers from cursed villages. Compasses begin to lie, pointing in the wrong direction, and GPS navigators malfunction. These data correlate with historical evidence that animals avoid such places and people experience discomfort and disorientation. Geologist Tatiana Volkova has proposed another hypothesis. In her opinion, many of the cursed villages were located in areas with a special geological structure. Such places often have deposits of radioactive ores or underground sources with high levels of heavy metals, the researcher explains. Prolonged exposure to radiation or toxic substances could have affected the health of residents, causing epidemics and mental disorders. Medical research confirms this hypothesis. Analysis of well water in some abandoned villages showed elevated levels of lead, arsenic, and other toxic elements. Chronic poisoning with such substances could cause hallucinations, depression, and other mental disorders, which would explain the strange behavior of the inhabitants and rumors of possession. Of particular interest are studies of infrasound in cursed places. Physicist Mikhail Gromov discovered that ruined buildings and landscape features in such areas can create infrasonic vibrations with a frequency below 20 Hz. Such sound waves are not perceived by the human ear, but they have a strong effect on the psyche, the scientist explains. They can cause feelings of anxiety, panic attacks, and even hallucinations. Psychologists have also contributed to the study of the phenomenon of cursed villages. Doctor of Psychology Olga Nazarova is researching the influence of collective memory on the perception of certain places. The human consciousness is capable of transmitting information about traumatic events across generations, she says. Children absorb their parents' fears and prejudices, creating a self-perpetuating effect of superstition. Soil studies in cursed places have yielded interesting results. Microbiologist Sergei Romanov has discovered that the soil in such areas often contains spores of ancient bacteria capable of surviving in unfavorable conditions for hundreds of years. Some of these microorganisms can produce toxins that affect the nervous system, explains the scientist. Under certain conditions, they become active and can cause poisoning. Climatological studies have revealed another interesting fact. Many cursed villages were located in places with a special microclimate. Low-lying areas where fog accumulated, or in areas with frequent thunderstorms. High humidity contributed to the growth of mold and other fungi, whose spores could cause hallucinations and respiratory diseases. Archaeological research also provides important data. Traces of mass graves are often found in cursed places, confirming historical evidence of tragic events. However, sometimes the findings raise more questions than they answer. For example, human remains with unusual bone damage, the nature of which has not yet been established, were found in one of the abandoned villages. Modern technologies allow for comprehensive research of such places. Thermal imaging reveals temperature anomalies. Spectral analysis reveals unusual atmospheric composition, and seismographs record micro-vibrations in the ground. But even with such a technological arsenal, many phenomena remain unexplained. Professor Ivan Sidorov, who heads an interdisciplinary project to study anomalous zones, admits, "We can explain certain aspects of the phenomenon of cursed villages, but we don't yet have a complete picture. Perhaps we are dealing with a complex phenomenon where physical, chemical, psychological, and social factors act in combination." But the question remains, are scientific explanations sufficient for a complete understanding of the phenomenon, or are They're aspects of reality that are not yet accessible to modern science. The village of Kostomarovo in the Voronezh region has become a symbol of one of the darkest pages in the history of Russian villages. The tragedy that occurred here in 1937 forever changed the fate of this place and turned it into one of the most sinister and cursed villages in the country. To this day, local residents avoid these places, and the few researchers who have visited report strange phenomena and inexplicable events. Kostomarovo was founded in the late 18th century by settlers from the central provinces of Russia. By the beginning of the 20th century, it was a thriving village with a population of about 800. The inhabitants were engaged in agriculture, cattle breeding, and beekeeping. The village was famous for its honey and grain, which were even supplied to Moscow. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed the impending catastrophe. Everything changed with the advent of Soviet power and the beginning of collectivization. Kostomarovo, like many other prosperous villages, became the focus of special attention from the authorities. Local kulaks resisted the creation of a collective farm, which led to an escalation of the situation. By the end of the 1920s, an explosive situation had developed in the village between supporters and opponents of the new regime. The tragic events began in the winter of 1937, when a commission arrived in Kostomarovo to carry out a purge of counter-revolutionary elements. It was headed by Nikolai Krovavik, a man who earned his nickname for his cruelty in carrying out repressions in other regions. In a few weeks, more than 150 people were arrested, almost 1 in 10 residents of the village. But the worst happened on the night of March 4th to 5th, 1937. According to the official version, a kulak uprising broke out in the village, which was suppressed by the NKVD. In reality, a real massacre of civilians took place. According to declassified archival documents, more than 300 people were killed that night, including women, the elderly, and children. Surviving witnesses recounted the horrific details of that night. People were gathered at the village school, ostensibly for re-registration, and then shot in groups. The bodies were thrown into a large pit on the outskirts of the village, which local residents had been ordered to dig in advance. By morning, Kostomarovo had turned into a ghost village. Of the 800 residents, fewer than 200 were left alive. After the tragedy, the village began to rapidly empty. The surviving residents, overcome with horror and grief, left their homes. By the end of the 1930s, no more than 50 people remained in Kostomarovo. The authorities tried to repopulate the village with new residents, bringing in families from other regions, but all attempts ended in failure. The settlers complained of nightmares, visions, and an irresistible desire to leave this place. The mass grave on the outskirts of the village gained a particularly sinister reputation. Local residents claimed that moans and cries could be heard coming from there at night. Some witnesses spoke of ghostly figures rising from the ground and wandering the village streets. Attempts by the authorities to fill in the grave and camouflage it were unsuccessful. Every spring, the ground would sink, exposing human remains. The war and post-war years finally finished off Kostomarovo. The last residents left the village in the early 1950s, and it was officially removed from the administrative division. The houses gradually fell into ruin, and nature began to reclaim the territory. But the memory of the tragic events has been preserved in folk legends and archival documents. In the 1960s, attempts were made to create a state farm on the site of the village, but they all ended in failure. Workers complained of strange phenomena. Tools broke on their own, animals became restless and refused to eat, and strange sounds could be heard at night. After several months, construction was halted, officially citing unsuitable geological conditions. Modern researchers are showing great interest in the history of Kostomarovo. In the 1990s, archaeologists worked here and confirmed the existence of a mass grave. Several mass graves containing the remains of hundreds of people were discovered. Forensic medical examination showed that many of the victims died from gunshot wounds, which confirms the evidence of executions. Geophysical studies of the area provided interesting data. Scientists found elevated levels of iron in the soil, which can be explained by the large number of metal objects, bullets, shell casings, and personal belongings of the dead. This anomaly creates local changes in the magnetic field, which can affect animal behavior and human well-being. Psychologists note that Kostomarovo is a classic example of how collective trauma can affect the perception of a place. Information about tragic events is passed down through generations, creating lasting negative associations with a particular territory, explains Elena Volkova, doctor of psychology. Even people who are unaware of the history of the place may experience discomfort on an intuitive level. But the most mysterious fact remains that even almost 90 years after the tragedy, this place continues to inspire inexplicable fear in people. Can human suffering on such a scale really leave an indelible mark on the very structure of reality? The psychological aspect of cursed villages is one of the most intriguing facets of this phenomenon. Modern research in psychology and neuroscience is uncovering surprising mechanisms of how collective memory and traumatic events of the past can influence the perception of certain places by modern people. These discoveries force us to take a fresh look at the nature of so-called cursed territories. Marina Sokolova, doctor of psychology at the Institute of Psychology of the Russian Academy of Sciences, has been studying the phenomenon of collective trauma for more than 15 years. The human psyche has an amazing ability to store and transmit information about traumatic events across generations, explains the researcher. This happens not only on a conscious level through stories and legends, but also on a deeper, archetypal level. The mechanism of collective trauma transmission involves several components. First, there is the direct transmission of information from parents to children through stories, warnings, and emotional reactions. Children absorb not only factual information about tragic events, but also the emotions associated with them: fear, grief, anxiety. These emotional imprints can be preserved for many generations. Second, there is the phenomenon of epigenetic transmission of trauma. Modern research shows that severe stress can alter gene expression, and these changes can be passed on to descendants. People whose ancestors have experienced mass tragedies may be more sensitive to stress and anxiety, making them more susceptible to the negative atmosphere of certain places. Neuropsychologist Alexei Voronov is researching the influence of place on brain function. Our brain constantly processes many signals from the environment, many of which remain at a subconscious level. says the scientist. The smallest details, smells, sounds, lighting features, can activate ancient fears and instincts embedded in our genetic memory. Research into the so-called place effect is particularly interesting. Psychologists have found that people visiting cursed villages for the first time and unaware of their history often experience similar negative feelings: anxiety, depression, and a desire to leave. This suggests that information about traumatic events can be stored not only in human memory, but also in the environment itself. Professor Olga Krylova from Moscow State University studies the phenomenon of psychogeography, the influence of geographical locations on a person's emotional and mental state. Every place has its own unique atmosphere, which is formed by a combination of physical, historical, and social factors, she explains. Places of mass tragedies have a particularly strong psychological impact, which can be felt by people on an intuitive level. Research in child psychology provides interesting data. Children living in areas with a problematic history often show increased levels of anxiety and a tendency to have nightmares, even if they are unaware of the historical events. This may indicate the existence of unconscious mechanisms for perceiving the energy of a place. Social psychologist Dmitry Petrov studies the role of collective beliefs in shaping the reputation of places. When a large enough group of people share certain beliefs about a place, these beliefs begin to influence reality, the scientist asserts. People begin to behave in accordance with these beliefs, which can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. This mechanism is particularly evident in the case of cursed villages. If the local community considers a certain place to be dangerous or cursed, people subconsciously avoid it, which contributes to its further desolation and destruction. Abandoned, dilapidated buildings create an atmosphere of decay and neglect, which reinforces negative associations. Clinical psychologist Elena Morozova works with people who have had abnormal experiences in cursed places. Many of my patients report similar symptoms after visiting such places: insomnia, disturbing dreams, obsessive thoughts of death and suffering, says the specialist. This may be the result of the activation of archaic fears embedded in the collective unconscious. Researchers pay particular attention to the phenomenon of psychic infection, the ability of negative emotions and fears to spread between people. In groups of people visiting cursed places, emotional contagion is often observed. One person experiencing fear or anxiety can transmit these feelings to other members of the group. Modern neuroimaging studies show that when people are in cursed places, certain areas of the brain associated with processing threatening information and fear responses are activated. Interestingly, this activation occurs even in people who are skeptical about the existence of paranormal phenomena. Psychotherapist Igor Solovyov notes the therapeutic potential of understanding the psychological mechanisms of haunted places. Working with collective trauma can help people free themselves from irrational fears and negative associations passed down through generations, he believes. Understanding the psychological nature of these phenomena is the first step toward overcoming them. But the question remains: if psychological mechanisms can explain the perception of cursed places, what about the objective physical anomalies that instruments record in such areas? Perhaps the boundary between the psychological and the physical is not as clear-cut as we are accustomed to thinking? The village of Dead Salts in the Kirov region is a unique example of how an ecological disaster can give rise to mystical legends and turn an ordinary place into a cursed zone. The history of this settlement demonstrates the close relationship between human industrial activity and the emergence of anomalous phenomena, which local residents explain as the work of supernatural forces. Dead Salts was founded in the mid-19th century to extract salt from underground brines. The deposit proved to be rich, and by the beginning of the 20th century, a large salt works was operating here, providing jobs for more than 1,000 people. The village prospered with a developed infrastructure, a school, a hospital, a church, and even its own theater. No one could have imagined that salt mining would be the cause of future misfortunes. The problems began in the 1920s, when the Soviet authorities decided to intensify salt production for the needs of the growing industry. Old technologies were replaced by more aggressive methods, including the use of chemical solvents and explosives to open up new deposits. These methods made it possible to increase production several times over, but they had disastrous environmental consequences. The first warning signs appeared in 1928. Local residents began to complain about the deterioration in the quality of drinking water, which had acquired a salty taste and an unpleasant smell. It soon became clear that industrial brines were seeping into the groundwater, poisoning wells and boreholes. The authorities assured that the problem was temporary and would soon be resolved, but the situation only worsened. By the mid-1930s, the environmental situation had become critical. The brines began to rise to the surface, forming salt marshes and poisoning the soil. Vegetation across vast areas died, and animals left the area. The Solyanka River, which flowed through the village, was particularly affected. It turned into a dead stream where no fish lived and no algae grew. But the worst happened on August 23, 1936. As a result of the careless use of explosives at one of the sites, an underground reservoir containing concentrated chemical brine ruptured. The toxic liquid gushed to the surface, flooding a significant part of the village. 127 people, including children and the elderly, died in this disaster. The official authorities declared the incident an industrial accident and classified all investigation materials. The bodies of the victims were buried in a mass grave on the outskirts of the village, and the surviving residents were ordered not to tell anyone about what had happened. The plant was temporarily closed for technical work, but a year later, production resumed at the same intensity as before. After the disaster, strange phenomena began to occur in Dead Salts. Residents reported ghostly figures wandering around the flooded areas, the voices of the dead calling for help, and a strange glow coming from under the ground. The mass grave of the disaster victims gained a particularly eerie reputation. At night, moans and cries could be heard coming from it, and the land above the burial site always remained barren. Attempts to continue life in the poisoned village proved futile. By the early 1940s, most of the inhabitants had left Dead Salts, unable to withstand the constant exposure to toxic substances and the growing number of diseases. The few dozen families who remained suffered from chronic poisoning, respiratory diseases, and mysterious skin diseases. The war finally finished off the dying village. The factory was evacuated, and the equipment was taken to the rear. The last residents left dead salts in 1944. Officially, the village was removed from the administrative register, and the territory was declared uninhabitable due to unfavorable environmental conditions. Post-war attempts to eliminate the environmental consequences of the disaster were unsuccessful. The soil over a vast area remained poisoned, and the groundwater was contaminated with chemicals. In the 1950s, an attempt was made to reclaim the land, but it was abandoned after several workers died from toxic fumes. Modern environmental studies confirm the catastrophic nature of the pollution in the area of the former dead salts. The concentration of heavy metals, salts, and other toxic substances in the soil and groundwater exceeds the maximum permissible limits by tens of times. The area within a radius of several kilometers remains a dead zone where no grass grows and no animals live. Interestingly, many of the anomalous phenomena reported by visitors to these places may have a perfectly scientific explanation. Toxic fumes can cause hallucinations and perceptual disturbances, while chemical reactions in the soil can create unusual light effects. Sounds that are mistaken for ghostly voices may be the result of gas movement in underground cavities. However, some evidence remains unexplained by modern science. Researchers of anomalous phenomena report electromagnetic anomalies, unusual temperature fluctuations, and other physical effects whose nature has not yet been established. It seems that the ecological disaster has indeed changed the properties of space itself in this place. Dead salts has become a sad symbol of how human activity can turn flourishing lands into cursed territories. But it remains a mystery why the consequences of an ecological disaster take on a mystical character and continue to affect people decades after the tragic events. Behind many of the tragedies that gave rise to cursed villages lie not only natural disasters or social upheavals, but also deliberate actions by the authorities to conceal the truth. Conspiracy theories associated with cursed places point to systematic attempts to silence large-scale tragedies, conceal traces of crimes against humanity, and manipulate public opinion. These theories are confirmed by declassified archival documents and eyewitness accounts. Alternative history researcher Vladimir Chernyayev has been studying classified materials from the Soviet period related to mass tragedies in Russian villages for more than 20 years. The authorities have always tried to minimize the scale of disasters and hide their own responsibility for them, he says. Many villages became cursed precisely because the official version of events differed radically from reality, and the truth was passed on only through oral tradition. A classic example of such a conspiracy of silence is the story of the village of Krovoy Yar in the Smolensk region. Officially, this village was abandoned as a result of the voluntary resettlement of residents to more promising areas. In fact, as declassified KGB documents show, in 1952, a tragedy occurred here related to biological weapons testing. According to secret reports, experiments with new types of bacteriological agents were conducted in Krovoy Yar. Local residents were used as unwitting test subjects, and when the experiment got out of control and an epidemic began, the entire village was cordoned off by troops. The surviving residents were taken to closed medical facilities, where most of them died from the effects of the infection. Documents show that the village was treated with chemical disinfectants. The houses were burned down, and all traces of what had happened were carefully destroyed. In official reports, the tragedy was presented as the planned liquidation of an unpromising settlement as part of a program to consolidate collective farms. Relatives of the deceased were told that their loved ones had moved to other regions and lost contact. Similar cover-up schemes were used in other cases. The village of Cherny Omut in the Tver region was officially flooded during the construction of a reservoir, but declassified materials tell a different story. In reality, the village became the site of large-scale repression against old believers who refused to submit to Soviet power and convert to official Orthodox Christianity. Former KGB archive employee Anatoly Sedov talks about the documents he saw in the 1970s. The case file stated that more than 400 old believers, including children and the elderly, were killed in Cherny Omut. They were accused of counter-revolutionary activities and ties to foreign religious centers. After the massacre, the village was burned down, and the area was flooded to hide the traces of the crime. Particularly cynical were the authorities' attempts to use the superstitions of the people to cover up their own crimes. After the tragedies in the villages, rumors spread about divine punishment for the sins of the inhabitants, about curses and other worldly forces. These rumors were often initiated by the authorities themselves through front men, wanderers, holy fools, and false prophets. Special Services historian Mikhail Krasnov discovered interesting documents from the 1950s and 1960s in the FSB archives. There were special instructions on how to create legends around places of mass repression. The goal was simple: to divert attention from the actions of the authorities and shift responsibility to mystical forces or the victims themselves. No less interesting are modern attempts to classify information about the cursed villages. Many researchers encounter obstacles when trying to obtain archival materials or conduct excavations in such places. The official reasons for the refusals are usually related to national security or nature conservation, but the real motives may be quite different. Investigative journalist Elena Gorskaya has been trying for 10 years to gain access to materials about the village of Prokliata in the Arkhangelsk region. I am constantly denied access to documents, citing various formalities. At the same time, local residents say that in the 1950s, there was a secret military facility there where chemical weapons were tested. Perhaps the consequences of these tests are still being felt today. The conspiracy theory is further confirmed by an analysis of the geographical location of the cursed villages. Many of them were located in strategically important areas, near military facilities, secret factories, or transport hubs. This may indicate that the tragedies in these places were related to the military or industrial activities of the state. Paranormal researcher Igor Tsarev hypothesizes that some of the cursed villages may have been testing grounds for psychotropic weapons. During the Cold War, both superpowers were actively developing means of influencing the human psyche. Isolated rural settlements were ideal locations for such experiments. Modern DNA research on remains from mass graves in cursed villages sometimes yields unexpected results. In some cases, genetic abnormalities are found that may indicate exposure to radiation or chemical mutagens. This data is carefully classified, which only confirms theories about the concealment of the true causes of the tragedies. Psychologist Alexei Morozov studies the influence of state propaganda on the formation of myths about cursed places. The authorities have always been able to use the superstitions of the people to their advantage. It is much easier to declare a place cursed than to explain to the people the reasons for and those responsible for the tragedy. Superstition silences witnesses and scares away the curious. But the question remains: if the authorities are indeed hiding the truth about the tragedies in the cursed villages, could the paranormal phenomena in these places be the result of unfinished military experiments or the influence of unknown technologies? The village of Pogost in the Pskov region occupies a special place among the cursed settlements of Russia. The name itself speaks of its original connection with the world of the dead. After all, Pogost, in Old Russian, meant a place of burial and remembrance of the deceased. The history of this place dates back to the pre-Christian era, when it was the site of an ancient Slavic sanctuary dedicated to ancestor worship and communication with the souls of the dead. Archaeological research shows that the territory of modern Pogost was used for ritual purposes as early as the 10th and 11th centuries. The remains of stone circles, sacrificial altars, and ancient burials arranged in accordance with pagan traditions have been discovered here. After the adoption of Christianity, the pagan sanctuary was destroyed, and a wooden church dedicated to All Saints was built in its place. However, the connection with the other world did not end with the arrival of the new religion. The churchyard became a place of mass pilgrimage. People came here from all over the region to pray for the souls of the dead and receive protection from evil spirits. Local priests were famous for their ability to exorcise demons and heal the possessed. The village prospered, serving the needs of numerous worshippers. The first ominous events in Pogost began at the end of the 16th century, during the reign of Ivan the Terrible. The local priest, Father Varsanofi, was accused of witchcraft and connections with evil forces. According to the denunciation, he allegedly practiced forbidden rituals, communicated with the spirits of the dead, and predicted the future with the help of magical rites. In 1584, the priest was arrested and tortured. Under torture, Father Varsanofi confessed to having relations with the devil and accused half of the villagers of witchcraft. Mass arrests and executions began. In a few months, more than 80 people accused of witchcraft and heresy were burned. Before their death, many of them cursed their accusers and predicted terrible disasters for the entire village. After these tragic events, inexplicable incidents did indeed begin to occur in the village. Residents told of ghosts of burned witches who appeared alive and demanded justice. Strange phenomena began to occur in the church. Icons wept blood, bells rang on their own, and during services, voices singing prayers in an unknown language could be heard. The Pogost Cemetery gained a particularly sinister reputation. The graves of the executed heretics were located separately from the other burials on the northern side of the cemetery. Local residents claimed that moans and screams could be heard from there at night, and ghostly figures roamed among the crosses. Some witnesses told of encounters with spirits who asked them to convey messages to their living relatives. The church tried several times to consecrate the cursed graves, but all attempts ended in failure. The priests who performed the consecration ceremony fell ill with strange diseases or went mad. One of them, Father Nikifor, after spending a night in the cemetery, claimed to have seen a host of demons dancing on the graves of heretics and heard their blasphemous chants. In the 17th century, Pogost became the center of the Old Believer movement. Local residents, dissatisfied with Patriarch Nikon's church reforms, declared their village truly orthodox and refused to recognize the new rites. This led to a new wave of repression. In 1675, a punitive detachment of Streltsy was sent to the village to suppress the schismatic rebellion. The events of that time repeated the tragedy of the 16th century. More than 200 Old Believers were arrested and tortured. Many of them preferred death to renouncing their faith and were burned in log cabins. Before their execution, the Old Believers sang spiritual verses and prayed, and their leader, Deacon Dosiphe, pronounced a curse on all who participated in the persecution of the true faith. After these events, Pogost finally became a cursed place. The village began to empty, with residents leaving their homes, unable to bear the constant presence of otherworldly forces. By the end of the 17th century, the population had dwindled to a few dozen people. The church was abandoned, and the cemetery turned into a wild place that even passing merchants avoided. In the 19th century, attempts were made to revive Pogost. New settlers tried to rebuild the destroyed houses and establish a farm, but all efforts were in vain. People complained of nightmares, visions of the dead, and unexplained sounds coming from underground. Livestock fell ill and died, crops failed to grow, and children were born with various deformities. Modern researchers of paranormal phenomena consider Pogost to be one of the most active places in Russia. Electromagnetic field anomalies, sudden temperature changes, and acoustic phenomena are regularly recorded here. Many visitors report encounters with ghosts in medieval clothing and voices calling their names. Particularly intriguing are reports of time anomalies in Pogost. Some researchers claim that in certain places in the old cemetery, time flows differently. Clocks begin to slow down or speed up, and people feel as if they have been transported to the past. One expedition recorded strange light phenomena on video, resembling torchlight processions. Psychologists explain the Pogost phenomenon as an accumulation of collective trauma. This place has experienced several waves of mass repression and executions, says Elena Volkova, doctor of psychology. Such a concentration of human suffering could have created a powerful psychoenergetic field that affects people's perceptions. But it remains a mystery why this influence has persisted for centuries and is even evident in people who are unfamiliar with the history of the place. Perhaps the answer lies in the very nature of human consciousness and its ability to interact with subtle planes of reality. In the 21st century, interest in cursed villages is not only not waning, but is taking on new forms. Modern researchers, armed with high-tech equipment and scientific methods, are going on expeditions to abandoned settlements in an attempt to unravel the mysteries of the past. Their work lies at the intersection of science and mysticism, objective analysis, and intuitive search for truth. Alexei Voronov, head of the research group Anomalous Zones of Russia, has been studying cursed villages throughout the country for 15 years. His archive contains materials on more than 150 such places. Each expedition is a detective investigation, says the researcher. We study historical documents, interview local residents, and analyze the geological and climatic features of the area. Only a comprehensive approach allows us to come closer to understanding the phenomenon. Modern expeditions are equipped with a variety of equipment. Electromagnetic detectors record magnetic field anomalies, infrared cameras capture temperature changes, and highly sensitive microphones record sounds in a range inaccessible to the human ear. Special gas analyzers determine the composition of the air, and dosimeters measure radiation levels. Marina Svetlova, PhD in physics, heads the Laboratory for Geophysical Research of Anomalous Zones at Moscow State University. We approach the study of cursed places with scientific rigor, she emphasizes. Every measurement is documented, and all data is checked and double-checked. Over the years, we have accumulated a huge amount of information that allows us to identify general patterns. One of the most interesting discoveries was the detection of so-called geomagnetic anomalies in the areas of cursed villages. In 80% of the places studied, the Earth's magnetic field has atypical characteristics: local amplifications or attenuations, chaotic fluctuations, or strange geometric patterns. These anomalies can affect the human nervous system and animal behavior. Archaeologist Dmitry Kozlov specializes in studying the material traces of tragedies in cursed villages. The Earth preserves the memory of the past, says the scientist. In the soil, we find not only artifacts, but also chemical traces of past events. For example, in places of mass burials, the concentration of phosphorus and calcium is significantly higher than normal, which is associated with the decomposition of human remains. Botanical studies provide interesting data. Biologist Elena Zelenova studies vegetation in cursed places. We have found that certain types of plants avoid such areas, while others, on the contrary, feel comfortable there. Of particular interest are indicator plants that react to changes in soil composition or microclimate. Psychologist Igor Temny has developed special methods for studying the psychological impact of cursed places on humans. We test expedition participants before, during, and after visiting anomalous zones, explains the specialist. This allows us to objectively assess changes in emotional state, anxiety levels, and cognitive functions. The results of such tests show that most people do experience certain changes in their mental state when in cursed places. Even skeptics who do not believe in paranormal phenomena note an increase in anxiety and a desire to leave the area. Interestingly, these reactions are also observed in people who are unaware of the tragic history of the place. Modern technology allows us to record phenomena that previously went unnoticed. Researcher Mikhail Volkov uses high-speed cameras to record fleeting light anomalies. Sometimes we record flashes of light that last a fraction of a second. They are impossible to see with the naked eye, but the technology shows interesting results. The researchers pay particular attention to acoustic phenomena. Sound engineer Andrei Gromov has developed a multi-channel recording system that allows the sources of sounds to be precisely localized. In cursed places, we often record infrasonic vibrations that can cause people to feel uneasy. But sometimes sounds in the audible range are also recorded, the origin of which remains a mystery. Geologist Sergei Kamensky studies the underground structures beneath cursed villages. Such places are often located above natural voids, karst, cavities, old mines, or underground rivers. This can create acoustic and vibrational effects that people perceive as paranormal phenomena. Historian Olga Letopis searches for and analyzes archival documents related to cursed villages. Behind each such place lies a specific history of human tragedy. Our task is to reconstruct the true picture of events, separating historical facts from legends and superstitions. An interdisciplinary approach allows us to obtain the most complete picture of the phenomenon. Toxicologist Vladimir Yad analyzes water and soil samples for toxic substances. In some places, we find traces of toxic compounds that may have accumulated as a result of industrial activity or natural processes. Chronic exposure to such substances can explain many mysterious phenomena. Modern expeditions are not limited to scientific research. Ethnographer Maria Folklore collects oral traditions and legends associated with cursed places. Folk memory preserves information that may be the key to understanding the events that took place. Sometimes legends contain details that are confirmed by archival documents or the results of excavations. But even with all the variety of modern research methods, some aspects of the phenomenon of cursed villages remain unexplained. Perhaps the answer lies at the intersection of different fields of knowledge. Or are we dealing with phenomena that do not yet fit into the framework of modern science? The village of Tiki Vodi in the Novgorod region is one of the most mysterious secrets in the history of Russian villages. Unlike other cursed places, where tragedies occurred in front of witnesses, in Tiki Vodi, people disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only empty houses and many unanswered questions. This story began on a cold October morning in 1978 and remains unsolved to this day. Tiki Vodi was a small village with a population of 230 people. The village was located in a picturesque spot on the shore of Lake Gluboko, surrounded by dense coniferous forests. The residents were engaged in fishing, logging, and tourism. Many city dwellers came here to their dachas and tourist camps. The village was considered one of the most prosperous in the area, with developed infrastructure and a stable economy. The first signs of the impending mystery appeared at the end of September 1978. Postwoman Maria Kukushkina, who served several surrounding villages, noticed that the residents of Tiki Vodi were behaving strangely. It was as if they were waiting for something, she later recalled. People gathered in groups, whispering about something, and fell silent when they saw strangers. Children stopped playing in the streets, and dogs howled at night. On September 27th, local police officer Nikolai Verny arrived in the village for his routine patrol. He noticed the unusual silence. There was no barking of dogs, no voices of children, no sounds of machinery. When meeting with residents, the officer noticed that people avoided direct eye contact and gave monosyllabic answers. When he tried to find out the reasons for their strange behavior, the locals referred to family problems and asked him not to interfere. The last time the residents of Tiki Vodi were seen was by bus driver Pyotr Dorogin on October 5, 1978. He brought mail and groceries as usual, but noticed that there were unusually few people on the streets. Several people came out to the bus, took their packages, and silently dispersed, the driver said. No one talked or laughed. It seemed as if everyone was deeply troubled by something. The alarm was raised only on October 12th, when the bus failed to pick up school children from Tiki Vodi for a trip to the district center at the appointed time. The driver found the village completely deserted. The houses stood with their doors open. Livestock grazed in the yards, but there were no people to be seen anywhere. Unfinished breakfasts remained on the tables, coals smoldered in the stoves, and the radios continued to work. The investigative team that arrived found a striking picture. All of the residents' personal belongings remained in place: clothes in wardrobes, money in bedside tables, documents in desks. There were no signs of struggle, robbery, or violence. It seemed as if the people had simply left their homes and vanished into thin air. The only odd thing was that all the clocks in the houses had stopped at 3:13. The search operation involving the police, rescue services, and volunteers lasted 3 weeks. All the surrounding forests, lakes, and swamps within a radius of 50 kilometers were searched. Service dogs, helicopters, and even divers who searched the bottom of Lake Gluboko were used. However, not a single trace of the missing residents was found. No bodies, no clothes, no personal belongings. The behavior of the animals was particularly mysterious. Domestic livestock remained in the village, but behaved extremely restlessly. Cows mooed and refused to eat. Chickens did not lay eggs, and cats gathered in packs and roamed empty houses. Service dogs brought in for the search also behaved strangely. They whined, cowered to the ground, and refused to enter certain parts of the village. The official investigation reached a dead end. Investigative authorities considered various versions, from a mass escape to a terrorist act, but none of them explained all the circumstances of the case. The absence of bodies, personal belongings, and any signs of a struggle made it impossible to classify the incident as a crime. The case was closed with the wording, "Unknown disappearance under unclear circumstances." Unofficial versions of what happened were much more exotic. Some paranormal researchers suggested that the residents of Tiki Vodi were victims of alien abduction or fell into a temporal anomaly. Others linked the disappearance to the activities of secret military services or the testing of psychotropic weapons. Local residents from neighboring villages reported strange phenomena observed in the Tiki Vodi area on the night of the disappearance. Several people saw unusual light phenomena above the village, bright flashes and slow-moving lights. Others heard a low-frequency hum, as if coming from underground. One witness claimed to have seen a large silver object hovering over the village. Geophysical studies conducted in the 1980s revealed interesting anomalies in the area of the former village. It was found that the magnetic field in this zone is unstable, with periodic sharp fluctuations. Minor but constant seismic vibrations were also recorded, the source of which could not be determined. Several attempts were made to repopulate Tiki Vodi, but all of them ended in failure. The newcomers complained of nightmares in which they saw the former inhabitants of the village calling them to follow them. Many noted strange sounds at night: footsteps, voices, creaking doors in empty houses. After a few months, all the new residents left the village, unable to withstand the psychological pressure. Modern researchers continue to study the mystery of Tiki Vodi. In the 2000s, an expedition of the Russian Geographical Society worked here and confirmed the presence of geophysical anomalies. Some items belonging to the disappeared residents were also found, but they were discovered far beyond the village in places where searches had already been conducted. Psychologist Elena Mystica proposed the hypothesis of collective psychosis, according to which the villagers could have believed in an impending catastrophe and committed mass suicide in some remote place. However, this version does not explain the absence of farewell notes and the strange behavior of animals. Ufologist Vladimir Zvyozny believes that the disappearance of the residents of Tiki Vodi is connected with the activities of extraterrestrial intelligence. All the circumstances of the case point to the intervention of a highly developed civilization. The simultaneous disappearance of a large group of people without a trace is a classic sign of UFO abduction. But the question remains, where did the 230 residents of Tiki Vodi really disappear to? And why does this mystery remain unsolved after almost half a century? Centuries of living near cursed places have taught the local population to develop complex systems of protective rituals and amulets. These practices, passed down from generation to generation, are an amazing combination of Christian traditions, pagan beliefs, and folk magic. Modern researchers have discovered that many of these rituals have deep psychological meaning and even scientific justification. In villages located near cursed places, ancient traditions of protection from evil forces are still alive. Old-timers tell how their grandfathers and great-grandfathers protected themselves from the influence of cursed villages. The basis of such protection has always been faith. It does not matter whether Christian or pagan, the main thing is that it is sincere and deep. The first and most important means of protection was considered to be a cross worn around the neck, but not every cross had sufficient power. It had to be consecrated in a church where a righteous priest served and worn with sincere faith. Crosses made of silver or sacred woods, oak, aspen, or rowan, were especially prized. Some families kept crosses that had been passed down through several generations. Home amulets were considered no less important. In every hut located near a cursed place, an icon of the family patron saint was hung. A lamp burned in front of the images, and consecrated salt, silver coins, or iron nails were buried under the threshold. These items were supposed to keep evil spirits out of the house and protect it from bad influences. Water played a special role in protective rituals. Holy water brought from the church on Epiphany or Easter was used to sprinkle the house, livestock, and family members themselves. It was believed to wash away negative energy and create an invisible barrier against dark forces. Some families kept such water for years, replenishing their supplies only on major church holidays. Plant amulets also occupied an important place in the protection system. Garlic, wormwood, St. John's wort, and nettles were considered powerful remedies against evil forces. They were hung in the house, carried in amulets, and added to food. Rowan was especially valued. Its branches were stuck into all the cracks in the house, and its berries were carried in pockets. It was believed that rowan had the ability to scare away evil spirits with its special smell. Temporal restrictions were another important element of the protective system. Local residents knew at what time of day and on what days it was dangerous to approach cursed places. Usually, this was midnight, the time between sunset and sunrise, as well as certain days of the week. Tuesday and Friday were considered particularly unfavorable. During these periods, people tried not to leave their homes or engage in important activities. Collective protective rituals were performed by the entire village. Once a year, usually at Easter or on the day of the local saint, the inhabitants made a procession around their settlement, carrying icons and church banners. This ritual was supposed to renew the protective circle around the village and strengthen its connection with the divine forces. The priest blessed all four corners of the world and recited special prayers. An interesting feature of protective practices was the use of mirrors. It was believed that mirrors could reflect not only physical light, but also spiritual darkness. Small mirrors were hung above the front door, in windows, and even carried around as personal amulets. At the same time, there were strict rules for handling mirrors. They could not be broken, left open at night, or looked at by candlelight. Protective spells and prayers were passed down in families from mother to daughter, from father to son. These texts could not be written down. It was believed that the written word lost its magical power. Spells were recited at a specific time, in a specific place, and in accordance with a number of ritual conditions. Many of these texts contained archaic expressions and words, whose meaning was no longer understood even by those who recited them. Special attention was paid to the protection of children and pregnant women. They were considered to be most vulnerable to the influence of dark forces. Children were given amulets from birth. Special prayers were read over them, and their names were kept secret until baptism. Pregnant women were forbidden to approach cursed places, and during childbirth, all possible candles and lamps were lit in the house. Modern psychologists find deep therapeutic meaning in these protective practices. Rituals help people cope with fear, give them a sense of control over the situation, and strengthen social ties within the community. In addition, many elements of traditional protection have a perfectly rational explanation. For example, garlic really does have antiseptic properties, and religious processions help to strengthen social unity. But the most important thing about protective rituals is the belief of those who perform them. A sincere belief in the effectiveness of a talisman can mobilize a person's inner resources and help them resist any external influences, whether real dangers or imagined threats. Studying the phenomenon of cursed ghost villages leads us to surprising conclusions about the nature of human memory, the power of collective consciousness, and the mysterious properties of reality itself. After analyzing numerous cases, historical documents, and contemporary research, it becomes clear that we are dealing with a complex phenomenon that cannot be explained by a single scientific discipline or theory. The historical component of the phenomenon is undeniable. Virtually every cursed village is associated with real tragic events, epidemics, mass repression, military actions, environmental disasters. These events have left a deep mark not only in historical chronicles, but also in the collective memory of the people. Traumatic experiences are passed down through generations, creating lasting negative associations with certain places. The psychological aspect of cursed places has also been scientifically confirmed. Studies show that places of mass tragedies do have a special effect on the human psyche. This may be due to both conscious factors, such as knowledge of the history of the place, and subconscious factors, such as the perception of subtle signs indicating the events that took place there. The physical anomalies found in many cursed places require serious scientific study. Geomagnetic disturbances, changes in soil and water composition, acoustic effects, all these phenomena can affect human well-being and animal behavior. Perhaps it is the combination of physical and psychological factors that creates the special atmosphere that makes some places cursed. The ecological component of the phenomenon cannot be ignored either. Many cursed villages were located in areas with special natural conditions or were subject to man-made influences. Soil and water pollution with toxic substances, radiation, industrial emissions, all of this could have affected the health of residents and created the conditions for the emergence of mystical legends. The social aspect of the problem is related to the mechanisms of transmission and consolidation of collective fears. Local communities that have experienced traumatic events develop protective strategies, including avoiding dangerous places and creating taboo systems. These social mechanisms contribute to the preservation of the negative reputation of certain territories over the centuries. The political component of the phenomenon manifests itself in attempts by the authorities to conceal or distort information about tragic events. Classifying archives, spreading false versions of events, and banning research all contribute to the mythologization of real events and the transformation of historical facts into legends. Modern technologies open up new opportunities for studying cursed places. Satellite imaging allows us to discover hidden archaeological sites. Geophysical methods reveal underground anomalies, and molecular genetic analysis establishes the true causes of mass diseases of the past. However, even the most sophisticated instruments cannot record some aspects of the phenomenon. The paradox of cursed villages is that the more we study them, the more questions arise. Some of the phenomena observed in such places do not fit into the framework of modern scientific understanding. Perhaps we are dealing with manifestations of properties of reality that have not yet been studied by science. One of the most intriguing hypotheses is the assumption that human consciousness is capable of influencing the environment more profoundly than we are accustomed to thinking. Intense emotional experiences, especially those associated with suffering and death, can leave peculiar imprints in space that can affect subsequent visitors. Another hypothesis is related to the quantum properties of reality. According to some theories of modern physics, an observer can influence the phenomena being observed. Perhaps collective expectations and fears are indeed capable of materializing in the form of anomalous phenomena. This idea remains in the realm of science fiction for now, but it is possible that future discoveries will shed light on this mystery. The practical significance of studying cursed villages goes far beyond academic interest. Understanding the mechanisms of the formation and transmission of collective trauma can help in developing methods to overcome it. This is especially important for the modern world, where conflicts and disasters continue to create new, cursed places. The therapeutic potential of working with cursed places also deserves attention. Purification and healing rituals practiced by various cultures may prove to be effective tools for overcoming collective trauma. Contemporary psychotherapy is beginning to recognize the importance of working not only with individual trauma, but also with social and historical trauma. The ethical aspect of studying cursed villages requires special attention. Researchers must show respect for the memory of the victims and the feelings of local residents. The commercialization of tragic events in the form of mystical tours is unacceptable without taking into account the opinions of the descendants of the victims and local communities. The future of the study of cursed villages lies in an interdisciplinary approach that brings together the efforts of historians, archaeologists, psychologists, physicists, ecologists, and representatives of other sciences. Only the joint work of specialists in various fields can bring us closer to understanding this mysterious phenomenon. Perhaps cursed ghost villages are windows into aspects of reality that modern science is only beginning to understand. Their study could lead to revolutionary discoveries in the fields of consciousness, memory, and the fundamental properties of space-time. But for now, these mysteries remain unsolved, reminding us how much our world still hides.